From beautiful downtown Millheim, in the smack dab center of the Keystone State, this is Lou Bryson with Seen Through a Glass, a podcast that's mostly about food and drink in central Pennsylvania. Welcome to episode 49, More Whiskey Business. You know how I just said, how I always say, the podcast that's mostly about food and drink in central Pennsylvania? Well, this is one of those episodes where the mostly part comes in. What I have for you today is an interview with Bill Welter, the guy who owns and runs Journeyman Distillery. This is kind of part 2 of episode 46, where we talk to the Crystal King of Chicago, Marty Duffy, about the Glencairn glass and craft distilling. I recorded that interview back in early October, when I took a week off writing my next book, more about that shortly, then went out to Journeyman to judge a barrel-aged beer competition and sell books. After the competition and a great barbecue dinner with the brewers, Bill came back to the cottage where Marty and I were staying, and we did the interview you're going to hear. It's a good story about how the place started, but I won't lie to you, it's not in Pennsylvania. Journeyman is in Three Oaks, which is way down in the far southwestern corner of Michigan. It's a neat little town, about the size of Center Hall, or Liverpool, or Belleville, with a theater, a bakery, a couple bars, a butcher shop, and a pretty sizable distillery with a huge restaurant and event space and a really long and welcoming bar in what used to be a large lingerie mill centered on turkey feathers, which is, oddly, why their award-winning wheat whiskey is called Corsets, Whips, and Whiskey. You see, this fellow was looking for a cheaper replacement for whalebone to make stays for corsets and to stiffen buggy whips, and he found that the shafts of turkey feathers did the job. It was all great for a while, but with a business centered on corsets and buggy whips, you can see why the building was waiting for a new tenant. So why is a Michigan distillery and a podcast about central Pennsylvania food and drink? Well, the drink connection is obvious, and you can order Journeyman whiskey through the PLCB's special order system. But mostly, it's because when I went to Journeyman the first time, after years of urging by Marty, I saw this was a great story and a pretty cool place that was a lot like Central PA. I mean, to get there, I drove for hours through fields of grain on 2-lane roads, and it really felt like home, if a bit flatter. A lot flatter. Just flat, really. But a story is a story. You'll like this one. So let's get going. And you know what that means? Here's what I'm drinking today. Today's drink is from the Heaven Hill Heritage Collection, a 19-year-old 100 proof wheat whiskey. 51% wheat, 37% corn, and 12% malt. From 277 barrels that were produced in the late summer of 2005, it's the oldest wheat whiskey Heaven Hill has ever released. And honestly, I'm torn about this. Here's what happens. Because I write about whiskey, and I'm one of the better-known whiskey writers, distillers send me samples. Some of them are quite expensive and maybe limited and hard to find. So do I taste them and tell you about them because you wouldn't otherwise get to know about them? Or should I not? Because, as some have told me in the past, it's just unrealistic to even think you might find it or decide to buy it. It's something I struggle with. But I'm really curious about this one, so we're going to taste it. You're curious too, I can tell. Here goes. I have to be honest, I had already poured the whiskey, and I've been smelling it this whole time ever since I started recording. It's really blowing out of the glass, even at 100 proof. And it's spicy. There's orange. A really nice, almost kind of cream candy note. There is, of course, a fair amount of oak, which you'd expect from a 19-year-old whiskey. I understand that these barrels were stored in the middle floors, the 5th and 6th floors of a 9-story rick house. So kind of insulated from the big swings in temperature that you see on the top. Speaking of my upcoming book, there's a whole section on thermodynamics in whiskey warehouses. So you'll going to get a lot more of that. So this is a lot less dry and almost bitter, oaky smell than I expected in the nose on a 19-year-old whiskey. But Heaven Hill has always had a large amount of older than average whiskey. They know how to keep it. They like to have it. And this is another example of how well they do it, at least to the smell. Let's taste it. There is a bit of fire there, but mostly this sits on the tongue quite nicely. Baking spices. This is almost like a spice cake with some of the sugar knocked back. It's not unsweet, but it's not heavily gloppy sweet. There's oak right in the front. There's more coming through the mouth, but there's a big dollop up front. And then the finish actually brings in that cake character again. It's as if you had a spice cake without the icing. So it's just that a nice, moist, spicy cake without a whole lot of sugar and without that sweet icing on top. Clove, cinnamon, not much of that orange I was smelling in the aroma coming off of it. That's not really present in the mouth. It's surprisingly welcoming, again, for a 19-year-old. And I guess that's the gentleness of the wheat. Wheat generally makes a softer, easier whiskey than even corn, but definitely more than rye. That's quite nice. Is it $300 nice? That's something you're going to have to decide. And as always, when you get into a 19-year-old American whiskey, some of the price is coming from rarity because a lot evaporates in that long in the temperatures down in Kentucky. Wow, I can't stop sipping this stuff. That finish is just marvelous. Wow, that's pretty good. All right, before we run off to Michigan, it's time for Smack Dab in the Center, sponsored by the Happy Valley Adventure Bureau. Everybody always thinks about the weekend when they're planning a good time, but I'd like to sing the praises of Tuesday. You know, you can do a lot on a plain old weekday if you look around. Tuesday is a great day in Boalsburg, for instance, even in the winter. There's the Boalsburg Farmers Market, set up in the fire hall during the cold weather, although there are always a few hearty souls selling fresh-raised food outdoors, like the folks from Polecat Farms, with pork, chicken, and yes, my friends, fresh eggs. Indoors, you will find mushrooms, more fresh meats, wild-caught salmon, fresh breads, woolen goods and yarn, kombucha, coffee, and more. Cross Bowl Avenue is the Pennsylvania Military Museum, which is temporarily closed for significant renovations. But you can still stroll the grounds on quite nice walking paths and view a variety of retired military machines, including 2 massive guns from the main battery of the old battleship USS Pennsylvania. Pop back across Bowl Avenue, and if it's after 3, you can drop into Bowl City Brewing for a restorative beer or other locally made drink. Their great outdoor spaces may not be exactly appealing in this weather, but that just makes their indoor space that much cozier. You can set up a group tour of the Bowl Museum and their Columbus Chapel. You'll need to call ahead for that. Or you could get an early start on the day with a delicious breakfast or lunch at Breakfast on Bowl. Plain old Tuesday? Terrific Tuesday! You can find all of these places on the Happy Valley Adventure Bureau website, happyvalley.com. Well, off to Michigan. The drive, which I've made many times as I've headed to Chicago or Wisconsin for events or family vacations, is long and flat. I can't lie. There are several choices for routes, but they all involve interstates and trucks and service plaza food. So as soon as I can, I like to get off the interstates and take the 2 lanes through Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan. If that sounds nuts, well, out there, the 2 lanes are mostly straight, flat, and fast, with a lot more options for impulsive stops at diners, donut shops, brew pubs, and antique stores. It's rarely a non-stop trip, and by the time I get to Three Oaks, I'm relaxed and ready to drop anchor at Journeyman's Distillery Bar. Journeyman Distillery is primarily a whiskey maker. They make gin and vodka and rum, even brandy, plus an array of liqueurs, creams, and infusions. They have some fun and delicious slushy drinks at the bar, too. But their heart is in whiskey. They've won serious awards for their full range of whiskeys. I mean, Bill's daughter is named Isla after the Scottish island crammed with famous distilleries. So that was the first thing Marty dangled in front of me to try and get me to come out. Whiskey, all you want. Hey, I get that all the time. So what? Big deal. And then he started telling me about the Journeyman complex, the cottages, the par 15 golf course. It's a series of putting greens out back, but it's a lot of fun. And the town of Three Oaks itself. It sounded idyllic. And eventually, I gave in. What a great time! After I got in and settled, I went to the bar at the distillery as planned. I had a Manhattan made with their last feather rye, an interesting spirit, a wheat-heavy rye. No corn, just 60% organic rye, 40% organic wheat. Made a spiffing Manhattan, I can tell you that. Then I have a picture of it, and I remember it was something fruit and froth and delicious. I'll be dipped if I can recall what it was. Anyway, about that time, Marty showed up, and we walked over to the Tomcat Tavern on Elm Street, the main north-south street in town. The Tomcat is a classic tavern. Wood walls, drop ceiling, sassy, friendly staff, and a great burger. I was in the area, so rather than my usual craft draft, we decided to have a couple cans of Old Style, the regional light lager of choice. The waiter returned to our table with a case of 12-ounce cans of the stuff and grinned as he told us to feel free to choose the can we wanted. It was a hoot. That's what Three Oaks is like. It's the best parts of the Midwest. Friendly people who don't take themselves too seriously, small towns with tree-lined streets, good food, plus Journeyman. If I do this again next year, I really want to take Kathy along. Let's talk to Bill. He's a good guy. Slender, sharp, but quick with a grin and self-effacing. He comes from a family of small-town bankers, and he has the sense of mission of town building that comes with that territory. Journeyman is about whiskey and making some money, but it's also about bringing people to the area and creating jobs. It's a good place. Let's talk to Bill about it. Hey, I've got Bill Welter from Journeyman Distillery?
Distillery, or just Journeyman.
Okay,
Yeah.
Cool. All right.
Yeah.
I never remember to ask this before I start recording.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bill, we're actually in one of the cottages you guys have on the campus.
Yeah.
I remember telling my wife just before I left, I'm like, the thing that really impresses me is how, not sprawling, but it's a big operation you have.
Yeah. Yeah, we're here in good old Three Oaks,
right?
Michigan.
Right, slap dab down in the southwest corner of Michigan.
Yeah, we're like 8 miles from Lake Michigan, 2 miles from the Indiana border, and in a great little town that no one's ever heard of called Three Oaks, Michigan.
I hadn't until I came. I came here 2 years and did the same judging. Yeah,
it's got a great history though. People love it.
Tell me something about that history, about the building you're in, the whole.
Yeah.
Featherbone.
Yeah, we're lucky in the sense that we were looking for an old factory building. Didn't think we'd find it in Three Oaks, Michigan, a town of 1,000 people.
Why would you?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And kind of drove into town, drove down the main street, which is a one stoplight town, and kind of came to the end of the town, which is only about 500-600 yards, and then took a left at the end of the street, and lo and behold, there was a factory building here.
Yeah, it's a big brick building, right?
Big old brick building, and we were looking for an old factory building. I think my thought initially was, because we weren't going to source whiskey, that was never part of the model, right or wrong.
Yeah, you wanted to make it.
Yeah, we wanted to make it, and I figured early on that if we found an old factory building, maybe people would think that the whiskey was older than it was because the factory looked old.
See, and that's the marketing, right?
It might have worked.
Yeah. Tell me about that building.
The building is incredible.
It's an interesting story.
Yeah, we came into town here, and lo and behold, a man named E.K. Warren started his business here in Three Oaks. Warren had developed the idea of taking the quill of a turkey feather and turning it into a lightweight, flexible stave.
I'm sorry, I'm still
right.
up.
I know, it's hard to believe.
I've heard this story several times.
And for sure, we're the only distillery in a corset and buggy whip factory in the world. That's for damn sure. So Warren in the 1880.
But turkey quills worked, right?
Yeah.
Did the job.
I guess the story goes he was in Chicago walking down the street and passed a company that was making like pillows and mattresses and feather dusters, and they're using the turkey feathers for those products, but discarding the quill and just throwing it away. So Warren thought, well, that's basically a free product, and developed a patented stave that replaced the whalebone.
Wow!
And also the same material was used to make buggy whips. So apparently overnight, like within just a few years, Warren was making over $1 million a year making corsets and buggy whips. Yeah.
Out of turkey quills.
Yeah, out of the quill of a turkey.
That's amazing.
Yeah, truly. And Warren was an entrepreneur and really somebody who was an aggressive capitalist and was driving this product and put Three Oaks on the map. And not long ago, we had a marketing intern, and I said, his name was Luke. I said to Luke, just out of curiosity, like, can you just run down to the local to the library here in Three Oaks? And I said, I want you to do some research and tell me, when is the town of Three Oaks successful? Like, just because the town's had some ups and downs and booms and busts.
Sure.
And so he went over there, and he's a smart kid. It didn't take him long. He went over to the library and talked to some people and looked some things up. And he came back that day and said the town of Three Oaks is successful when the Warren factory building is occupied.
Wow.
That's all he said.
Wow.
And I said, you're right.
Nice.
Like, because, there was a long period where the factory was unoccupied and the town wasn't doing well. And then there's been periods, since we've been here, but also many years ago, where the town was incredibly successful. And when the factory building is occupied, the town is doing well. And so we came in 2010 and started renovations and started occupying the factory building. And from there, I think our business grew and developed, and the town also had success with them. So yeah, we've been fortunate to kind of been a part of the growth of Three Oaks. There's been many great businesses that preceded us, including Warren, going back to the 1800s, and then certainly the Dryer's Meat Market has been in town here, which is over 100 years old, run by the Dryer's family continuously over that entire time. And Froelic's is a great little place in town that has had a lot of success, great bakers and other things. And then, lots of artists and makers in this community. And I think that's something that really, I think people have really enjoyed, because the town has become gained a reputation as a place for makers and creators.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's been great.
Yeah.
Wonderful history.
I like stopping by all those places.
Yeah, and I think what we found out when we started to renovate the factory building is that there's something about preservation, and there's something about old factory buildings in a community where, over a long period of time, many communities said, well, we should tear these factories down. And we're all familiar with, whether in our own communities or across the country, of people tearing down the factory buildings. And what we found is the rebirth of the actual physical structure led to this rebirth and revitalization and this storytelling that came to be, where people were saying, well, yeah, my great grandfather worked there. Yeah. And it was a space that really, I think when it was in disrepair, people weren't telling those stories. But when it came back to life, those stories of people followed the renovation of the building. And then suddenly there was like this spark in the community.
There's real heart.
There's a real something to, as you put it, it's like a heartfelt something about these buildings. And the idea that people tore them down at one point in time is kind of hard to believe, as we see many of these buildings coming back to life, and those same people stories coming with it, and it ignites the communities that these buildings are in.
Yeah. Yes.
So it's a wonderful thing, and I think it was kind of a accidental byproduct of what we were trying to do, but I think we realized that it was really important to communities, and then we took the next step and renovated and brought back to life an old factory building in Valparaiso, Indiana recently, and we're seeing many of the same things where people whose families were involved with those buildings and the workers and the people that worked in those buildings really came out in droves. Just, it's just an amazing feeling that people came there and had a real sense of pride of place of, these factories really meant something to them.
I mean, I love walking through your place, feeling like treading on those decades old floors.
Yeah,
and
you can feel it.
Yeah, the brick and the iron.
Yeah, there's a real sense of history there.
Yeah, I mean, I've often been asked, why did whiskey make a comeback? And I tell them it's because people want a real story.
Yeah.
And you don't just have a real story of whiskey, you've got a real story for this building, too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a story of whiskey. I think our brand has been fortunate to have a lot of different stories. One of it is the rebirth of the buildings and the stories that go with the buildings, but also certainly, I would say, certainly when you look at the leaders in the craft whiskey space going back to, Clear Creek and St. George and some of the great distilleries out west. Mm-hmm. I mean, that they led the initial charge in the 70s and 80s, but then there was this huge movement that we were a part of, and we really feel like that we were in on the the very early stages of that first or that second rebirth, I guess we'll call it, and that I think what people appreciate about the distilleries that really started at the beginning of that next phase was, we didn't know what was going to happen.
Yes.
And we were just kind of saying, well, we believe in what we're doing. And there was a certain amount of faith and
faith
belief.
Take that jump.
Yes.
Yes.
And I think people who started their distilleries in 2009 and 10, 11, like there was definitely like this risk taking that, there was no evidence that this was going to work. And we were definitely a part of that first phase. And I think people look at that and go, well, they were believers. They actually believed in what they were doing. It wasn't just like, oh, this is a hot category or something. Like we should do this. Yeah, it was like, this is what they actually wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned authenticity and truth. And I think being a part of that very early movement has definitely given our brand credibility and people saying, well, they were one of the first ones and they were in on, before a lot of other people were doing it. Yeah. And there's like I said, that credibility to them.
So let's talk about the whiskey a little bit. I think the only Journeyman products we can actually buy in Pennsylvania, which is my core audience, are the Last Feather Rye and the Featherbone Bourbon.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah, I mean, look, honestly, if you're able to find our whiskey in Pennsylvania at all, I'd be thrilled. Like, can we?
I'm pretty sure it's special order.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's the whole world of distribution. We could probably do an entire podcast just on that and my own experiences in trying to build a brand outside of our immediate market.
I might have mentioned to you earlier today when I was at American Craft Spirits Association competition earlier this week. That's all anybody was talking about. Distribution.
It's a tough time right now.
Yeah. So tell me about your flagship.
Yeah. So our flagship brand has been our Last Feather Rye. And, I think, I know that when we first opened Journeyman, that rye whiskey made up, is less than 2% of the American whiskey market was rye sales.
Yeah, it was all but dead.
And so we were, I was kind of captivated by history, obviously. These old factory buildings really is something exciting for me, but also the history in whiskey, having spent quite a bit of time in Scotland and then coming back and doing a lot of research on the history of American whiskey. And then obviously, if you're looking at that category, then you start looking at George Washington, our first president, and being an incredibly successful distiller himself and making rye whiskey. And then at the same time, there was this movement and evolution of craft cocktails where a lot of these mixologists were looking back at the way drinks were made in the 1800s 1800s and 1900s, and saying, bourbon wasn't used in a Manhattan.
Yeah, a lot of it was rye.
Yeah, it was rye whiskey. So, that really captivated me, and I said, we should make rye whiskey. At the same time, I became a big fan of Buffalo Trace and a lot of the products that they were making. And this was long before, Pappy Van Winkle was a thing. And going down to Buffalo Trace and kind of being a part of what they were doing and observing that they were using a lot of wheat in their mash bills. And I said,
I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah.
You use a lot of wheat.
Yeah. So initially, one, I was captivated by the rye story and the history there. And then secondly, I was really enamored with what Buffalo Trace was doing in 2009 and 10. And that crazy Buffalo Trace, Weller, Pappy Van Winkle thing hadn't taken off. But I think I recognized, at least at that point in time, that there was something special that they were doing with wheat. So our initial rye recipe was 60% rye and 35% wheat and a little bit of malted barley. Mm-hmm. And really, that was just the combination of that historical rye standpoint combined with what I discovered, what I thought was really great whiskey with Buffalo Trace using wheat. And we created a mash bill that was really, with our rye, kind of unheard of. No one was doing like this high wheat secondary grain with their ryes. And in fact, at the time, all the rage was MGP's 95.5. Right. And so, in a way, it was a good thing for us because we wanted to be kind of the antithesis of MGP and everything that they were doing and kind of create our own
Not that what they were doing was bad.
Yeah, no, they were making great
whiskey. It was everywhere. Why do that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we had to differentiate ourselves.
Sure.
And, I look back on it now and we thought we were being innovative and doing something really different. I suppose maybe at that point in time we were. But then, a lot of distilleries came along and whether it was Corsair or so many others now that have and really kind of turned innovation on its head. And it makes us, I frankly think that it makes us look like, we were kind of like, at the very beginning of innovation, but we thought we were doing something different at the time.
It doesn't hurt that your whiskey's good.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, the whiskey, and I think our whiskey was meant to be a kind of a combination of traditional techniques, but what we thought was somewhat innovative at the time and kind of, bringing rye to the forefront. I mean, we'll always be able to say we made our first batches of rye in 2010. And that we were making it with wheat as a secondary grain. And as history goes, I doubt, anyone will ever remember that for any reasons. But, maybe in 100 years, if we're...
some really dry guy is going to write a book. It's like, oh, they were doing
Yeah,
this,
Journeyman did this. Yeah, exactly. And 5 people will read it.
Right.
But,
there'll be this fist come up out of your grave like, I told you.
Yeah, we did it. I mean, I think the craft spirits industry at that point in time was maybe less about innovation and more about can we do this?
I was going to say survival.
Yeah,
right.
Can we even figure out how to do this? Because I tell there's so many resources now. And I remember I went to ADI this year for the first time in a while and ran into Bill and said, I mean,
Bill Owens.
Yeah, Bill Owens.
Yeah.
I said, Bill. And he and I have corresponded a lot over all the years. And I remember calling him on, when I first thought, well, maybe we should do this. And I remember him saying to me, just do it. And that stuck, it's Nike's tagline, but
right.
it made sense.
Sure.
But I remember going to the first ADI conference that I attended, and that was in 2010. And he and I were kind of laughing because I don't think there were more than 50 people there. And it was we all got on a little bus to go around. And there's I mean, compared to, and this year we went to ADI in Baltimore and Marty was there. And it was, I mean, it was I don't even know how big that place was. It was 100,000 square feet of space of vendors and people. And I was like, my God, this is what this turned
different.
into.
Yeah.
And it had been a while since I'd been to ADI, and I was just truly blown away and enamored by what happened. Because when we went to this thing in 2010, I'm telling you, there weren't 50 people there that attended it. And I don't even know if there are any vendors or anything. It was just like a few, educational classes. And I'm not saying it wasn't worthwhile. It was, but it was, kind of like this thing of like, what are people doing?
Now, I remember the first really big craft brewers conference I went to, and I was just stunned, knocked over.
Yeah.
Yeah. What has this become? Right?
Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah. Honestly.
So, getting back to the wheat. I mean, you do have a lot of wheat in your spirits, and a lot of it is. A lot of it, or all of it, is organic and Michigan grown?
Almost everything we make is certified organic and kosher.
Okay, and a lot of it grown fairly local?
Yes, yeah. In fact, like a number of local farmers converted to be certified organic so that we would buy the grains from them because we had to have certified organic.
So I have to ask then, do you consider yourself a wheat distillery or a rye distillery?
Yeah, I read that in your notes there, and I honestly, in the moment, I thought, well, that's a really good question. Can we be both?
Why not?
Yeah, and I would say that for sure, like, from a historical standpoint.
Because your vodka is wheat too, right?
Yeah. I would say that, rye was the very first thing we ever made.
Okay.
Like that was the first product. And then what we realized, after playing around with wheat in the rye mash bill, that we thought, well, and of course, the evidence was there with Buffalo Trace. Yeah. At least we thought.
Right.
At the time, though, they weren't like receiving these accolades for wheat. But I mean, I think everyone perceived the whiskey as being very good. And I would say that after we played around with the wheat and the rye mash bill, that we thought this wheat's really good.
Yeah,
so that's when we said, let's just make 100% wheat. And no one was doing that. Bernheim was making wheat whiskey, but it was almost kind of like a bourbon modified mash bill. I mean, technically it's a wheat whiskey, but it's borderline, bourbon.
Yeah, but you really threw open the throttle.
Yeah, we just said let's just do 100% wheat. Yeah. And I don't, again, like I said earlier, I don't know if that's innovative, but we just thought, we were just going with our senses and going, God, this wheat seems really good. Like, why don't we just distill wheat? And so I suppose it was a bit of an evolution where, we did the rye with the heavy wheat, and then we just did 100% wheat. And then, of course, later on, we've had a lot of accolades and success with just doing the 100% wheat. And I think it's still like, and this is what I've been saying, is like a nothing category. I mean, if the wheat category ever actually comes to life, we'll be there. Right. But like bourbon obviously is king, and then rye has had its growth and seeing more focus, and then wheat is just kind of a
couple of us
people don't even know what it is.
I know.
And so maybe we're just ahead of the curve.
You get critical acclaim on it.
Yeah,
your wheat whiskeys have won awards.
Yeah, and truly blind taste tests that people who are considered experts in the industry taste it and have said this is an incredible product.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think
and I'd be willing to bet they're surprised when they find out it's 100% wheat.
Yeah. For sure, and they're surprised when they find out that it's made by us.
Well, yes,
not some like
I have to be 100%. I was
sure.
The first time, the second time I was out, I'm like, there you go.
Yeah. I mean, and what kind of happened is that we had made a lot of this wheat thinking it was really good when we distilled it, and then it didn't sell at all.
Oh no.
So, I'm talking about like 12, when we first started 12 years ago.
Did you?
No, well, I mean, we didn't make a ton of it because we weren't making a ton of anything. I mean, I try and tell people when we got started in distilling, like, no one thought that distilling was going to be some kind of like, oh my God, you should be making whiskey 24 hours a day. Like, why didn't you buy a still 10 times larger? Like, are you kidding me? Like, we got into this thing. No one was doing it. We're like, we're going to go broke. Like, this is stupid. Like, what are we doing? Like, I know my wife and I thought in the first 3 months that we were going to go out of business.
Yeah.
Because everyone walked in the door and they said, "What kind of beer do you have?"
Oh my
like,
God.
I'm not kidding. Like 8 out of 10 people that walked in the door in the first couple of years, at least, said, "What kind of beer? What kind of beer do you have?" And
But dude, I'm gonna walk right over there right now and do that.
no. People just looked at us like cross-eyed.
Wow.
Like, you're making what?
Oh.
And I think a big part of that was that, I'm not saying that the big distilleries just didn't have consumers on site, but I really think craft distilling, the greatest thing that ever happened to big whiskey was craft distilling from a standpoint of bringing awareness to the big brands and creating an environment at our locations.
I would be willing to bet there are some smart big whiskey people out there who would agree with that.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So craft distilling brought like this human element to it where, Jack Daniel's, legendary brand, why did they need anyone to show up at their distillery and show them around?
It was fun.
They didn't.
That was about it.
Yeah, they're selling, hundreds of millions of dollars of whiskey and distribution. Why deal with the customer on site? But craft distilling had to have that to survive.
Right.
Like, we had to have people come.
Yeah.
And so we were educating people during all those years. And I think very quickly, I'm not saying that, no one ever went to go visit Jack Daniel's or something like that. But, I think that a lot of the larger legacy distilleries said, oh, we got to up our game too. Like, we got to have people here. We got to have tours. We got to have even more than what they were doing. And I think that's what craft distilling gave to the legacy distillers.
Well, I think there are also, craft distilling is almost certainly the reason that the legacy distillers started making
single
barrels
and craft products.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, why we saw Jack Daniel's Rye, just to stick with, I mentioned earlier how big the place is. Tell me about that. What can people do when they come here?
Well, here in Three Oaks, we've tried to diversify our business, and I would say that, largely in part because when we started, there was a huge unknown about whether distilling was going to be a reality, whether that was going to be a viable business. And honestly, almost 15 years into it, I still ask that question. Is craft distilling viable?
Yeah.
I think that's an honest and real question that people should be asking.
On an ongoing basis,
and perhaps
absolutely.
you guys, even yourselves, consider, is this sustainable as a business model? And so very early on, we said, well, we need to...
I certainly ask whether writing about it is.
Yes. Well, I guess what I would say is that, we felt like it was worth hedging our bets, meaning we said, we have to have tours, we have to have cocktails, we have to do flights, and then eventually that evolved into doing a restaurant and having event spaces for corporate.
You had a wedding, one wedding?
Yeah, there's a wedding tonight.
There was a wedding today. Yeah, and there was a wedding last night too.
Yeah. So we're very much in the wedding business, but and I know some like true like distillery purists.
Such a beautiful bride.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, there's some of the true like whiskey purists, I think, kind of poo-poo on they call them wedding distilleries or whatever. But
I'll bet some of those whiskey purists are getting married at places.
Yeah,
like this,
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I think for us it was more like, can we sustain ourselves as a distillery? Because look, as you guys know, Marty and Lou, you guys know that to start.
Yeah. By the way, Marty is actually here and staying remarkably quiet.
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
You guys know as well as anyone that like building a true whiskey brand from scratch without sourcing whiskey is about the hardest thing in the world to do, because you're growing your inventories and everything. If you started with a massive bundle of cash, kind of like maybe Sagamore, if you'd had a company like Under Armour that produced significant amounts of money, and you could do that, that's one thing. But for my wife and I, we were renovating a historic factory building. There's a lot of mouths to feed, and then you're kind of just going like, well, we can grow like incrementally. And in some ways, and I'm happy with the route we took in making all of our own whiskey and always having that statement of we're independent. I think over the long run that's going to be continue to be a great story, but certainly in some ways we missed a big piece of the boom because we just didn't have the whiskey, because we were trying to incrementally grow our inventories, and the folks, maybe Penelope or something is a good example, like sourcing MGP whiskey, putting it and I'm not disparaging these guys, and I've spoken with them, but and putting it in a cool bottle and doing some finishes and things like that. And those guys, all the credit to them. I don't, take anything away from what they've done, but next thing you know, they've got a $300 million brand. But our goals and what we've tried to do is, making all of our own products from scratch by us, and then creating a multi-generational business is a big part of what we've wanted to do. And it's never been about and especially if we started this thing in 2009, which we did, that, no one was thinking this thing is going to be some kind of great financial boon or something. No. So really, I would say that what we've tried to do
the people who built Penelope would never have thought of that in 2009. No, because there was no money.
Yeah, it had to be a proven entity. Yeah. And so for us, it was never, don't get me wrong, we want financial success.
Sure.
But at the same time, we know that to grow the business, we have to have that. But I think the other piece is it's more important to us to be true and authentic to ourselves and build a multi-generational brand that way.
Yeah, I think that's more sustainable in the long run.
I think so. Yeah. It's nice waking up in the morning and knowing that our inventories are ours, and that we're not relying on another distillery to make something for us.
Okay, so I'm going to swing you back and say, someone comes here, what can they do?
Yeah, so I think when people come here, we call it whiskey hospitality. And, first and foremost, the factory building itself is, something to be seen.
I saw people taking pictures of it.
Yeah, the story there is great, the history. Our distillery is basically in the middle of our building where it's connected to the hospitality piece, where you can be, eating or drinking in the restaurant and see us making whiskey. And I think that initially the focus there was that authenticity thing as well, where we wanted people to come in and see they're actually making whiskey here.
Yeah.
Versus an entertainment thing. But I think it's kind of segued into entertainment, where people thought, well, yeah, you can go there and eat at this restaurant and actually watch the whiskey being made. And it became this thing. So I think what you can do here is you can come here, have a historical experience with the building. You can eat and drink at a restaurant. You can take a tour. We have a 30,000 square foot putting green in the backyard here in Three Oaks. Yeah, where it's it's a replica of the mid 1800s putting green called the Himalayas in St. Andrews.
Wow, I did not know that. Okay.
Yeah, so that's where that came from, and then.
I saw people walking around with putters today.
Yeah, it's bizarre, isn't
it? Really is.
It's there's no place like it. And then, of course, Three Oaks is a walkable town, so it's a small, 5-block town with a lot of great things to see. So you can come here, park at Journeyman, see it, and then just, walk a couple hundred yards, and you're right smack dab in the middle of one of the best towns.
The Acorn Theater.
The theater is right next door to us. So it's a live performance theater right next door to us, which has a lot of great performances. Then there's actually a cinema in town, an art house cinema. Which is really, really cool. And then there's lots of boutique shops from kind of art driven focus, antiques, different things like that. And then one of my favorite places in the town, it's kind of the anchor tenant for the community, is Dreyer's Meat Market, which has been around for 120 years.
Yeah, I keep getting in at the wrong time to go, and it's
incredible. You walk in there and it's a history museum, and then you can order some of the best sausage in the area. But yeah, the town is just a very special place.
Yeah, it's a neat little place.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me about where we are. I mean,
So we're sitting here, and we'll call this Marty Duffy's castle here at 11 Featherbone on the backside of our distillery.
Nice.
And we have a few rental houses in the town here, and one of them is attached to the factory building where the distillery is, and it's a great old building, and the we call it the flat. The flat seats sleeps 19 people, so it's like a giant piece of the factory that we converted into lodging, used a lot by wedding parties, but certainly people who come here, and then there's a farmhouse. We call it the farmhouse, and it's on 50 acres, and just a really beautiful views out there, and you can see the distillery from a distance, and then we're sitting right now where you guys are staying, and again Marty's castle. We technically call it the bunkhouse, but we should change the name to Marty's home away from home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You do some cooperative products with the St. Julian Winery.
Yeah.
God help me, Pawpaw, Michigan.
Yes.
I couldn't believe when I saw that name.
I know.
It's about an hour northeast from here. How did that happen, and what kind of collaboration is that?
I mean, we've been fortunate to do a few collaborations with some different breweries and distilleries and wineries over the years, and I probably would go back to what we called the Four Kings, which is a product that
I remember that
kind of sparked the collaboration thing, and in the brewing industry, there's just it's a collaboration a day.
Four Kings was one of the earliest craft distilling collaborations.
I mean, honestly, I argue, and any of your listeners, I would love to know, but
you think it's
it might be the only collaboration.
Oh, wow.
Or the first.
Yeah, I think first, because I'm pretty sure I've seen a couple of others, but
yeah. I mean, I'm a big fan of the Dickel.
The Dickel Leopold
collaboration.
I think Four Kings was, and I remember people I'm not sure all those are technically bourbons.
There's a big to do about that.
But I mean, a collaborative whiskey.
And
when
really,
the hell was that? 2012, 2014?
We just did our 10th year, so it's 2014.
How about that?
And Ryan Burchett from Mississippi River Distilling really did a lot of the legwork there, but Paul from Few Spirits, and then the guys at Corsair, and then us. And really, it was more of an exercise in legalities and how can you actually do this, which is, I'm sure, why none of the big distilleries ever tackled it. But I would say, in terms of innovation and being forerunners and leaders in this industry, for sure that collaboration, I think, should go down as one of, or the first, real whiskey collaboration.
Yeah, and I mean, I gotta say, I still have half a bottle of it. That was good whiskey.
And I think this last year's batch, which we finished some malt, we all did malt in a tawny port barrel. It's really good. But so, I mean, that was kind of how things got started for us with collaborations. And then, naturally we wanted to partner with some of the industry leaders, and most recently St. Julian, which is dates way back in Michigan history, is one of the very first wineries, one of the leaders in Michigan, and also and importantly, one of the few wineries that's not sourcing wine from outside of the state. So like us, doing things in a truly, I guess, unique in the sense that we're making everything from scratch, and they're doing the same. So St. Julian, David Braganiti was the owner and passed away a few years ago, but was one of those guys that, I met with him a few times and was just a huge advocate of what we were trying to do, and was incredibly helpful. And so in some ways, while he's passed on, we really find a lot of significance and honor in working with St. Julian and what David had created in his family. and a great Michigan business in St. Julian. And on a side note, my mom's mother, my grandmother, is from the Pawpaw Manawatan region.
Okay.
So there's definitely some family ties up there around where St. Julian is, and we've done a lot of different things, some collaborations over the years with a lot of different people, and most recently St. Julian.
Yeah, I just thought that was a really nice thing.
Yeah.
I am here, and Marty is here too, to help judge the 7th annual Barrel Aged Brew Fest. Thank you for the invite and for putting us up here in the lodging. This is my second time. Had a great time. Tell us about the fest, how it got started, how it works, and the charity it benefits.
Yeah, how it got started is when our daughter, when Joanna and I had our one and only child, Isla.
Her name is Isla,
yes, yeah. Isla, named after the wonderful Scotch whiskey region off the west coast of Scotland. And I had a chance to go there before I met Joanna, and kind of fell in love with that place, and Scotland as a whole. Sure. Spent 18 months living in Scotland and mainly in St. Andrews, but got around the country quite a bit, and just, a lot of people ask me how I got into whiskey, and I say, well, I moved to Scotland, and that's about all you need to say, because, the people there, the history, the culture, and how I relate it to kind of the younger crowd today when I do our new higher orientation at Journeyman, and I say, well, imagine a place and it's area-wise, it's about the size of the state of Indiana. And I said, it's like Scotland's about the size of Indiana, but it's an island, in conjunction with England, obviously. And then I know I think it's really funny that they think of themselves as the mainland. I'm like, no, you're just part of an island. That's all you are. It's an island. And I say, imagine Indiana as an island. And imagine that there's 150 or more just world-class distilleries everywhere around the state of Indiana. Yeah. Imagine how that would change the culture of a place. And I said, that's what I learned when I was in Scotland. It didn't have anything to do with making whiskey. It had everything to do with that culture. And I was very familiar with the golf side of it. And their, belief and passion for their history in this game of golf. But also what I learned while I was there, and I didn't know when I went there, was they had the same passion and belief and same love for whiskey that they did for golf. And I thought, well, this is so cool, because I went over there to learn more about the history of the game of golf and came back really having learned a tremendous history of whiskey. And so every time. Yeah, so that's really how I got into the whiskey business, was pursuing golf, which I had done my whole life. Exactly. And then went over there and learned about this whole other thing that they're into. Yeah. And whiskey being, really part of the lifeblood of their society. And I would say that I left Scotland knowing maybe not as much about whiskey as I did golf, but learning a lot about whiskey, and enough to go back to America and go, I want to pursue this. Bill, this is a very Japanese sounding story. Yeah, you sound a lot like Takasura. Yeah, I know. Yes. That's true. Yeah. And, I would say that there's a real Eastern philosophy to what we do. One of our core values is called Always a Journeyman. And I wanted to ask about the name. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so the core value Always a Journeyman means, and you could add never a master to the end of that. So, and that's where that kind of Eastern philosophy of continual improvement comes in, where we never think of ourselves as ever achieving mastery or greatness. So you'll never hear us use the term master distiller. That'll never be used in our business. Okay. Because I believe, and having talked to a number of, true master distillers, like your Jim Rutledges of the world, even he goes, it's a marketing term. Yeah. He doesn't, because they're true learners. They're people who are don't view themselves as masters. They view continual improvement as the key to success.
Yeah.
And I think our core value always at Journeyman means like never a master, keep trying, keep improving, get better. We can do this. And you know, when you're going up against legacy brands that have been doing this for hundreds of years,
Right.
that's the only mentality you can possibly have.
You got to stay a little bit humble.
You have to.
Yeah.
Because we have so much to learn still. Like, not even still. Like, we probably have another 100 years of stuff to learn.
Yeah.
And we're trying to learn at the fastest rate we possibly can. Knowing, though, and I would say the same thing if those guys in Kentucky or in Scotland are sitting around and resting on their laurels, they're going to get passed.
Yeah.
And they need to continue to learn and evolve and become better. Because, you know, as we're seeing with Diageo and Brown-Forman and a lot of these, you know, large whiskey conglomerates, they're starting to really be impacted negatively. And they need to innovate. And they need to get better. And we all do. Otherwise, you know, you're just standing there and you're archaic. But I mean, these guys, Brown-Forman, Jack Daniels, I mean, obviously they've been pretty good at like being able to evolve over a long period of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Really
good.
There.
So, sorry. Again, circling back, tell me about the festival today.
Yeah, so today was our 7th annual Isla's Barrel Brew Festival, and grateful to have you and Marty there, and several other people who helped judge the competition. But when Isla was born, and our daughter Isla was born in 2012, in July of 2012, we filled a barrel of whiskey for her. And what I would say is, you know, at the time it was a 53-gallon barrel whiskey, and we weren't making that much whiskey. And it was actually like, you know, a lot of whiskey for us when we filled that barrel. Like, we're like, oh, should we do this? Should we not? I don't know. It's kind of a lot. It's expensive. We're not going to see anything from it for, you know, a couple decades, maybe. And then, you know, we made that decision to fill the barrel for her. And then we thought, you know, as the business grew and evolved and had success, we said, well, is there a way that we can do something for local kids? And so Isla's Barrel became a nonprofit in which we donate 100% of the proceeds from today's event. And the idea there was we had heard some stories locally from actually people who worked in the school system that some of the kids in the community that were going to the schools like had never even, you know, been to Lake Michigan, which is 8 miles away. And you know, sad stories like that. And, you know, those are stories, and whether those are true or not, I'm not sure really make a difference. But the bottom line was we thought, you know, wouldn't it be great if we could provide opportunities for kids who wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to do something. Like, if they've never been to Lake Michigan, they've certainly never been to an overnight camp, for an example. And I had a chance as a kid to do an overnight camp at Camp Eberhart in Three Rivers, which is just about an hour east of here. And I said, well, why don't we raise money and let's send kids that, you know, wouldn't necessarily have this opportunity to go spend time at an overnight camp. And because for me, it kind of changed my perspective on life, where, you know, you grow up in a household, you never really leave it, you don't get perspective. But then the first time you go to overnight camp, you're like, you meet kids, they tell you stories, you tell them theirs. Yeah, you become different, you evolve. And I think maybe in some ways even, I'll just say, you realize that there's hope, or that there's opportunity, or that there's a different way of life. And I think our hope was that, look, if there were really kids and their parents, you know, who certainly would have cars, wouldn't take their kids to Lake Michigan, like, can we get these kids to do an overnight camp? And the money that we've raised through Isla's Barrel was really an effort to change their mindset and perspective. And we weren't looking for straight A students. We were looking for kids who really, frankly, struggled in school and maybe had challenges at home or different things. And so the idea was like, let's send kids to overnight camp that could really use it. And that was the idea behind Isla's Barrel and the whole idea behind this brew fest. And the brew fest essentially is we've sold a lot of different whiskey barrels to breweries over the years around, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin. And so we started saying, hey, we've been selling you guys these barrels. Would you want to come and do a barrel-aged brew festival?
What'd you do with them?
That, you're using Journeyman barrels. And let's have you guys come back and let's showcase your talents. Let's showcase your abilities. And let's do a barrel-aged brew fest where 100% of the proceeds go to this nonprofit and sending kids to camp. That's really how it all started.
I mean, I love that we judged beers today. We judged ciders. We judged a Sizer, mead of cider blend.
Which I know you love.
I did. I really liked that one. Yeah. I mean, they're just really interesting beers. And I think that's all part of the thing as well, the whole collaboration thing we talked about.
Yeah. I mean, what you got today was about, a dozen or more local producers making really unique and cool stuff. And that's kind of the showcase and the highlight of a lot of great talents in the area that maybe you haven't heard of, whether you're in Pennsylvania or anywhere around the country. There's pockets of great producers all around the country.
Yeah.
Many great brewers and distillers in Pennsylvania as an example, and this just happens to be a little slice of what Southwest Michigan looks like.
Well, that was my last question. It's a long way out here. I mean, it was an 8-hour drive for me. Yeah. So, and I'm coming from right in the middle of Pennsylvania, so a lot of my listeners are even further away. What's here? Other than Journeyman, obviously, which is quite a draw. Yeah.
Great question. And we're very, very fortunate. We've been the beneficiary of a wonderful area. And what is going on in Southwest Michigan is that we're just a few miles from the dunes and Lake Michigan. And this, we're in Berrien County, and Berrien County gets about 4 million visitors a year.
Wow.
And it's almost entirely driven by Lake Michigan and summer vacationers.
Okay.
And so when Journeyman when we opened our distillery to the public in 2011, Greenbush Brewery had just opened a few months before us, and they were the third brewery in the area. So there had been Round Barn in Baroda, and then the guys with the livery up in Benton Harbor, and Greenbush was the third, and we were the first standalone distillery.
Okay.
And what happened was, over that time, there's now over 20 breweries in the county.
Okay.
Not just the 3. There's now 20, over 20.
Well, that's a reason.
There's only now a second standalone distillery,
okay,
Iron Shoe in Niles. And then there's always been, and they were the forerunner, the wine. And this is a wine region, and there's been many wine tasting rooms in this area, and that's been they were the initial groundbreakers. And then so what we've seen basically in Southwest Michigan is a huge boom, and what people are doing is they're not only coming here for the lake now, but they're coming here as a destination for makers, and craft makers of wine, beer, and spirits.
So is there food products? Is there?
Yeah, there's certainly a great focus on produce and unique products in Michigan. I mean, as you'll see with many of the beer, wine, and spirits, that people are using a lot of those natural products. So, for instance, we make a cherry whiskey from Montmorency cherries from up near Leelanau Peninsula in Traverse City. Yeah. And then we also do what we call our OCG, which is real Michigan apple cider, real Michigan apple juice. And
you sent me home with a bottle of that last time I was out. That was delicious.
So people love that. And that's really what people are doing all across Michigan, is taking Michigan's wonderful natural resources and highlighting and focusing on alcohol beverages really tell that
Feature.
story. Yeah.
That's all I got.
Yeah. Well,
Bill, thank you.
Grateful to have you here.
This has been great.
Yeah.
I didn't expect this would be quite as wide-ranging. I really enjoyed it.
And great to have Marty here, as always.
Always good to have Marty.
He's waving.
Making faces.
Yeah. It's great to have a couple legends here and be able to tell a few stories of our own and I'm a huge believer in this industry and what we're doing and certainly during this is a challenging period, as I think the alcohol industry is facing a lot of challenges, but I think it'll keep on going strong.
I think so too.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah.
Take care.
Thanks, Marty.
I would encourage you to find a craft distillery like Journeyman where you are. Relaxed, plenty of choices, good spirits, good food, and the best interests of the community at heart. They're out there, and I'm always looking for them. I'm going to get a little bit political here, a very little bit, and I don't mean that I'm going to get really political for a short time. I just want to talk about something that was a reaction to politics, but is just a good idea in general. Our home is in Millheim, but in a more regional sense, I live in Penns Valley, which runs roughly east-west from Woodward down to Center Hall and Potter's Mills. There's a strong identity with Penns Valley, and, well, Kathy and I are assimilating. The culture is an interesting blend of farmer ethics, self-reliance with a communal sharing, make and mend, small business, and what's usually referred to with varying amounts of affection as crunchy, a kind of ecological folk music, natural foods, and communal mashup. We fit in around the edges of several of those groups. I'm self-employed, we like folk music and locally raised foods, and we like helping out. So we found ourselves invited to a sing-along and ginger snap bake-off last month. It was a bitterly cold night, and we went to the home of someone we'd only just met in an old farmhouse in the process of being redone. Everyone kept their coats on, but it wasn't too bad, and of course, the more people that showed up, the warmer it got. Kathy had brought some of her famous molasses cookies. She won a blue ribbon at the New York State Fair 4-H competition with them. I brought Ricola. This was just before I got my voice back completely, but I had my bass register locked in. When folks got out their guitars and ukuleles and banjos, I was rolling on harmony. We started out singing old-timey gospel songs, even though most of the people weren't really believers. It's just good music, and I figured God gets a message across one way or another. In fact, it went so well, we just kept singing gospel songs, even though we had talked about singing some sea shanties. There were maybe 20, 25 people there at one point, about 8 of us singing or playing in the front room, and the rest in the kitchen, clapping along or humming or, eating cookies. And in between songs, we'd all chat and have some beers, or coffee, it was still pretty cold, and then go back to music. And at one point, we sang Space Oddity, all that ground control to Major Tom stuff. It was fun. And then we wound down, had a few more cookies, and headed home, feet crunching in the cold, crisp snow from the day before. How was that political? We didn't sing any protest songs, we didn't do any organizing, we barely even mentioned politics or any events outside the valley. It wasn't really political, except in the sense of, community. No matter where your politics are at right now, you can't go wrong connecting with your neighbors, your town, and people who want to get together and sing and have some homemade cookies. That's what we do in central Pennsylvania, and not just in the small towns. State College has 40,000 people, not counting students, and there are all kinds of active groups, singing, dining, volunteering. I guarantee you have some group near you that would be fun to join and happy to have you. It's a lot more rewarding than joining a group on Facebook, believe me. I'm still meeting new people here every week, and it's straining my weak memory, but it sure feels good. Well, tomorrow, Kathy and I are going down to Philadelphia. We'll have dinner with our son Tom, and the next day, the 22nd, I'm the special ambassador for German beer, just for the day, at the Philadelphia Beer Fest. 3 floors and 2 buildings of beer, food, music, and zaniness at the Pennsylvania German Society. It's an annual wonder that I love to attend. The next day, Sunday, is another annual wonder that I love to attend, the Day of Delicious Darkness at Elk Creek Cafe, right in the smack dab center of beautiful downtown Millheim, a celebration of dark beers. I think there are still some tickets left for the 4 o'clock session. That's the one we'll be at. I mentioned I had some book news. The new book finally has a name, American Whiskey Masterclass. It's like my last book, Whiskey Masterclass, about aroma and flavor creation in every step of whiskey making. But we took that book and ripped out all the Scotch, Irish, Canadian, and Japanese material and opened up the aperture for a fuller focus on American whiskeys. I can tell you, this is over half new material, expansion, addition, and even a few small corrections. As is always the case, I learned things researching this book, and I passed them on to you. The book has even better production values than my last one. Larger format, more pictures, just stylish all over. There are new photos, new interviews, and new illustrations, with help from a fellow Penns Valley resident, Dave Dries. And it's going to have a foreword from my old friend and colleague, Fred Minnick, or as I like to call him these days, the king of bourbon media. We have a release date, September 23rd. I'm not sure where we'll have the launch event, maybe here in central PA, maybe in Philly, maybe Pittsburgh, hell, maybe out in Kentucky. I'm working on that, and I hope some of you will be able to join me for it. As I said in the book, the best way to drink whiskey is with friends, new or old. Whiskey shared is twice enjoyed. And on that note, remember, find a good local distillery. Check into your local community. We'll all be better for it. That's the show. Thanks to Bill Welter for the interview, and once again to Marty Duffy for setting things up for that trip. You can find pictures for this episode on Instagram at Stag Podcast and on Facebook at Seen Through a Glass. If you are listening to the show on the radio at WSOV, there are over 40 more episodes to enjoy, including a Millheim episode and a Nittany Valley episode at seenthroughaglass.podbean.com. That's Podbean, Podbean.com. Or you can find us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to toss a bit in my hat to keep the show going, I have a coffee button in my Instagram link tree, that's at Stag Podcast, and at the Facebook page. Thank you. I thought I'd give you a weird Michigan fact today, since we spent so much of the episode there. 48222. What's weird about that? It's a unique zip code in Michigan. Yes, I know all zip codes are unique, but 48222 is the one assigned to the only floating post office in the U.S. Postal Service, the J.W. Westcott II, a small tugboat. The J.W. Westcott delivers mail to ships, mostly the big lake freighters, as they're moving through the Detroit River. They come alongside, and the mail is raised and lowered in a bucket on a rope. What's coming up next? It beats the hell out of me. I'm scrambling, I'm going to be honest with you. We'll see what happens in 2 weeks. Until then, thanks for listening. This is Lou Bryson with Seen Through a Glass from the smack dab center of the Keystone State.